Hey, this is Gladius bringing you the complete Acheron guide. Acheron is the best DPS ever made.
It's the best
damage dealer
that we have ever created.
There's no contest, Acheron have the highest damage multipliers in this game, but there's a lot we have to do for her to function at the highest level. Buffs, debuffs, all her teammates and each of their own respective builds are all pieces of the puzzle. If you follow me till the end, you'll find out how. In this video, we'll go over the kits, how to optimize her build with Lightcones, Relics, and team building, and without further ado, let's get right into it. Acheron have a completely different ultimate system than what we know in Honkai Star Rail. She doesn't have a typical energy system to fuel the ultimate, meaning killing enemies, energy gains, or energy regeneration rope and stats will have zero impact on Acheron. But Acheron indeed have an ultimate with a very big multiplier. Her whole kit revolves charging up this ultimate and buffing its final damage. Acheron's ultimate goes by a special energy point system. When you achieve 9 charges of something called Slashed Dream, you'll be able to activate it.
I can digivolve!
It's shown as purple flower petals on her frame, but from now on, I'll just refer to it as energy points. Just like any other ultimate, once available, it can be activated anytime. Except, Acheron's ultimate has 4 stages, with the first 3 stages at your control being able to swap targets. Swapping targets at these stages allow you to clear a status called Crimson Knot. The more stacks of Crimson Knot you clear, the higher damage you do to a specific target. Crimson Knot is stacked on enemies very intuitively and automatically when you gain energy points on Acheron, so this actually sounds way more complicated than it actually is. In reality, Crimson Knot stacking and targeting during the ultimate is automatically assisted by the game. It's hard to mess it up. As a player, the main focus for Acheron is to accumulate her energy points in the first place to reach 9 and make the ultimate become available. The last thing about Crimson Knot is that it doesn't count as a debuff, it is classified as other effects. Acheron's ultimate multipliers are largely AoE focused, with every target taking 300% and up to 372% on a single target. During the ultimate, she lowers all enemy resistance by 20. Acheron's ultimate also breaks toughness bars regardless if they're weak to lightning or not. The rest of Acheron's kit is to actually assist her in getting energy points to charge up this ultimate. Unfortunately, Acheron's basic attack does not contribute energy points directly, it will be rarely used. The most rudimentary way to gain energy point is her skill. It's a 3-target blast ability that does decent damage and grants her 1 Slashed Dream energy point. But of course, this is not the only way to do so, or else it will take forever to get 9 points. The main way to get energy points is stated in her talent. Whenever any unit inflicts a debuff on an enemy target, Acheron gains 1 energy point. The first takeaway here is that she only gets 1 energy no matter how many debuffs were inflicted in that single action. The debuff can be any debuffs, either character abilities, Lightcone abilities, or even just breaking enemy weakness, they all count. The second key takeaway here is that any action of any unit can trigger this, either Acheron or her allies, and even enemies themselves can trigger this if for any reason they inflict debuffs to themselves or others around them. There are quite a few enemies that do this. You can even force enemies to inflict debuffs on their own action by using a specific Lightcone that I'll talk about later. Due to little restrictions put on the talent trigger, most of Acheron's Slashed Dream energy points are obtained in this manner. All of Acheron's Ascension traces are super important and must be unlocked as a priority. First one is Red Oni. This grants her 5 energy points at the start of battle, which is very important for Acheron to roll out her first ultimate as soon as possible. It also introduces a mechanic that allows you to store extra energy points in case you overcap. Up to 3 energy points can be refunded after you cast your next ult. The next Ascension trace is called the Abyss. Whenever you have an extra of 1 and 2 nihility characters other than Acheron herself, Acheron gets a huge boost to her multipliers, 15% and 60% respectively. It's not a simple damage increase like Lightning Orb or Bronya buff, this is a 60% increase to all her base multipliers. Because of this, it is important to have 2 other nihility characters on her team. The final Ascension trace is Thunder Core. During Acheron's ultimate, she buffs herself up to 90% damage increase that lasts for 3 turns. It becomes pretty much permanent after Acheron's first ultimate. So real quick on trace priority, you'll want to definitely pick up the Ascension traces first, then max out her ultimate, then pick up the offensive stats like attack percent, crit damage, and lightning damage. To further boost her damage, you can finish off with leveling the skill and talent equally. You can definitely cheap out on leveling her basic attack, it won't be used that often. Acheron have the strongest technique in the game. You'll be able to insta-kill any trivial enemies in the overworld or simulated universe without even engaging in combat. And if you're facing stronger enemies that do engage in combat, you will deal really good AoE damage and break their toughness bars, regardless of typing. Kinda like a mini version of her ultimate. To understand how to build Acheron, we have to first analyze her damage profile, her stats, and self-buffing capabilities, and her team building restrictions. It's no surprise that the majority of her damage comes from the ultimate, followed by a decent amount being her skill, and break damage being a very small portion. Unlike most characters who mainly rely on themselves to charge their ultimate, for Acheron it's a team effort. The energy points she gained from her skill is only one portion of the whole. Thus, more speed or taking more actions doesn't have a one-to-one relationship to her overall damage output like most other DPS. Now, we already wanted 2 other Nihility characters to enable her overpowered passive. It's a bonus, they're really good at applying debuffs as well, so Acheron can cast more ults. Building more speed on her teammates is also a good idea to speed up this process. Acheron gives herself a 90% damage boost, which is huge. And in combination with certain Lightcones, attack percent orb becomes interchangeable with lightning damage orb. And since Acheron herself doesn't require speed stats, attack percent boots, attack percent rope can really put her in a super good position in terms of base attack multipliers as well. She doesn't get an insane amount of free crits from her kit compared to someone like Jingliu, so crit rate and crit damage becomes even more desirable stat for Acheron. It's a good thing Acheron have decent self-buffing capabilities, because her Nihility teammates won't be the best when it comes to buffing. What they do excel is debuffing. Defense shred will be huge for Acheron. With Nihility teammates, it's very likely you'll be aiming for a high amount of defense shred that becomes increasingly better as you approach 100%, but anything past 100 will be wasted. Resistance shred and vulnerability debuffs are relatively untapped for now. I know Acheron contributes 20% resist shred herself, but I'm saying in general, our options are okay, but nothing amazing. I feel like the potential lies in the future in the path of Nihility. Now that we understand Acheron better, let's talk about building main stats and substats. For body piece, it's almost guaranteed crit rate will be the best. In the very off chance that your substats went all into crit rate, you can consider crit damage. Attack percent is not as competitive because Acheron scales much better with crit. For boots, attack percent as a main stat is twice as effective as speed. As I mentioned before, Acheron's ultimate requires the whole team to charge up and is the majority of her damage output. Speeding up Acheron's action value only partially increases this damage, whereas attack percent always works. For speed boost to be better than attack percent, you'll want at least 4 or more crit substats for it to be compared. For orb, attack percent is more optimal than lightning damage, but it's close enough that one crit substat will offset any differences. So you're fine just choosing your best orb that is attack percent or lightning damage. For rope, this one is non-negotiable. Acheron can only utilize an attack percent rope. Other main stats offer little or no value. Even if you had 0 usable substats, you still choose an attack percent rope. Now for substats, we see a similar narrative. Crit value is the premium stat to go for, followed by attack percent, which is almost twice as good as speed. Priority for substats will be crit rate and crit damage over attack percent over speed. Building defensive stats on Acheron helps her survive a lot better because inherently she have one of the lowest defensive stats in the game, and as a Nihility character, she gets targeted more than your typical Hunt and Erudition DPSs. For Relic set bonuses, Acheron has tons to choose from, and due to how hard it is to farm crit value and how much Acheron wants crit, main stats and substats usually outweigh the benefits of getting 4-piece bonuses. For outer pieces, the Acheron's best in slot is Pioneer Diver of Dead Waters. It is comparatively less conditional and offers way too much crit value to ignore. 4-piece Quantum sets offer similar value to the Lightning set on average, but more conditional. while neither of which are her best in slot, but are really good substitutes if you have good pieces lying around. A 2-piece mashup is the next in line, being half as good as the bonuses of her best in slot. An interesting set that Acheron can use is the Prisoner in Deep Confinement. This set is by far the most conditional but most rewarding. You really have to satisfy two important conditions. One, you're playing the less conventional DOT Acheron team or dotcheron that I'll talk about later. And two, you're not overcapped on defense shred by going over 100%, and you're stacking some defense shred already to make it better. When conditions are met, this relic set is more than viable. It actually competes with her best in slot. The good thing about this set is that if you farm extensively for your DOT characters, you'll have many pieces lying around with high crits that you don't want on other DOT characters. But the question is, did you save them? If you're starting from scratch though, don't bother with any other set other than her best in slot. Only farm for Pioneer Diver of Dead Waters. It is by far the most efficient in getting most crit value for your stamina. For planner ornaments, you have even more choices, and matters a little less which ones you choose. The name of the game is to satisfy 2-piece bonus requirements while giving you the best main stats and substats. Be mindful of Glamoth and Space Sealing Station, as you might not want to build so much speed. However, if you do want to farm the absolute best pieces for Acheron, the new simulated universe coming out will be the place to be, which both has her best in slot Izumo Gensai and Signonia, which tends to overperform in pure fiction but underperform in MOC. I feel like Lightcone choices will be the biggest point of contention for most players building Acheron. The biggest problem is that Acheron is a crit-based Nihility character, which doesn't have too much compatibility with pre-existing Lightcones. Outside of her signature or other limited 5-star Lightcones, the best Lightcone Acheron can use is Good Night and Sleep Well. At high superimposition, this Lightcone offers up to 72% damage increase for Acheron against debuffed targets. The effect itself is actually super strong even compared to her signature. But what pulls Acheron's signature Lightcone 22% ahead is not the damage buff or the crit damage, but rather the raw amount of base attack it has. Also, being able to debuff targets implies that Acheron will now consistently generate 1 extra energy on her skill and basic attack, which would otherwise only be possible when Acheron breaks toughness when she attacks. This extra point of energy is responsible for increasing Acheron's damage by 7%. Acheron's signature Lightcone does a good job of making you feel like you absolutely need it for the extra energy, but in reality, getting 1 extra energy on non-breaking Acheron attacks is just a sliver of the whole team's energy generation. The real meat of this Lightcone is the base attack it offers, being higher than all other 5-star Lightcones even, and much higher than any 4-star Lightcones. What makes other limited 5-star Lightcones good is also their high base attack, and their potential to apply debuffs to trigger that extra energy on her skill, even though their Lightcone effect isn't even as good as S5 Good Night and Sleep Well. Weld's standard 5-star Lightcone underperforms with its lackluster effect, but it has 5-star base stats, makes it somewhat competitive if you don't have good options. Resolution shines as Pearls of Sweat is actually really good if you aren't overcapped on defense shred. It also applies a debuff to give you that extra energy point, sometimes. Because if the target already has one, it does not reapply, no energy. And you don't need to build effect hit rate because Acheron has a multi-hit on her skill, so it will trigger consistently even with a low base chance. The last line of defense before we ran out of options completely is Fermata from the MOC shop. This Lightcone is okay if you manage to fulfill the requirements of having shock or wind shear on enemies. But that's the problem, it's a tough condition without even being that rewarding. I will never use a 3-star Lightcone on Acheron if I can help it, because having low attack, defense, and HP will be the worst. She will scale terribly with stats and become extremely squishy. She already get a huge boost from her signature Lightcone, so how much further can we take with her Eidolons? Overall, accumulatively, Acheron has moderately high increase from her Eidolons up to E6, very comparable to limited DPS characters like Jingliu, Dill, or Argenti. But much like Dill, she puts most emphasis on the first 2 Eidolons. Acheron at E2 will accumulatively do 40% more damage, with E1 giving a flat 18% crit rate, and her E2 removing one nihility requirement to fulfill her passive, while at the same time giving one extra energy point whenever Acheron takes a turn. With Acheron at E2 S1, she actually generates a good amount of energy by herself, thus building speed becomes more desirable than before. E2 also enables a more flexible Hypercarry style team build, making it much easier to run Harmony characters. That being said, I feel like Nihility Path currently lacks proper 5-star supports that is compatible with Acheron. Right now we have Silverwolf, who mainly specializes in single target and mono quantum setups. Like I mentioned before in the damage formula, we lack good resistance lowering and vulnerability debuffs, both of which are yet to be fully realized by future Nihility supports. For the time being, we have extremely overpowered supports in the Harmony Path that works really well with Acheron, thus making her E2 very desirable in the short to medium term. And I also believe Nihility is the path with the most diverse design and function. As time goes on, I wouldn't be surprised to see Nihility healers or shielders to be released. The next notable Eidolon is 4. It automatically applies an ult vulnerability of 8% on all enemies entering battle. This works the same way as Silverwolf E2 and Black Swan's Arcana, where if enemies take an action to summon additional units, debuffing them results in an energy point for Acheron. But do note, when enemies walk into frame at the beginning of a wave, this is not an action, so no energy for Acheron. The final notable Eidolon is her E6. It grants 20% res pen to her ultimate, and now her skill and basic attack all count as ultimate will benefit from this buff. Her E6 isn't the best at damage output per se, but is a nice quality of life change to her kit. Now for the most important part, team building for Acheron. It's very important to max out her 60% multiplier boost from that passive, so we really want 2 other Nihility characters on the team. Now I did mention we don't have the strongest Nihility supports at the moment, and as overpowered as Harmony characters are, it's not worth losing out on this passive and force their way in. Unless you're going to forego your sustain for that Harmony character, which is okay and actually viable if you have a strong Acheron. The saving grace is that Nihility characters are actually really good at applying debuffs, making Acheron's ultimate a lot more consistent and frequent. We'll be analyzing Nihility characters on 3 factors: how frequent they can apply debuffs, how much damage boosting potential they have, and if they provide extra defensive utilities. Pela and Silverwolf are currently the best damage supports in the Nihility path. They're both above average when it comes to applying debuffs. Pela will want to use the Resolution Lightcone though to assist her basic attack in applying debuffs, but do note, if you're using Pela's ultimate and basic attack in a quick succession, make sure to use the ult after the basic attack, even if you're wasting energy. This is because Resolution Lightcone doesn't reapply as debuff. If the debuff is already applied, you won't get the energy. In terms of damage boosting potential, they're okay. They're not insane like Harmony characters, and Silverwolf provides a little defensive utility by crippling enemy stats. Speaking of defensive utilities, Welt is at the top for Nihility. You're able to cut enemy turns by ulting in between their double actions. This, in combination with slows and pushbacks, enemies are severely crippled. When played right, you'll be able to use Welt as a solo sustain, leaving the team open for a Harmony character that you wouldn't normally have without Acheron at E2. Now let's talk about the highest frequency debuffers we have, Black Swan and Kafka. They'll not be able to provide significant damage boost like other supports, but they are the best at charging up Acheron's ultimate. Black Swan's automatic Arcana application will give extra energy on enemy spawns. Black Swan offers a little defense shred as a bonus, but Kafka is even better at applying debuffs with her follow-up attacks, given you also equip her with Signature Lightcone or Resolution. Black Swan and Kafka is better played together. This is called the dotcheron team. Dotcheron teams scales really well with Black Swan's E1 and Kafka having her Signature Lightcone. It's definitely a more expensive team, but at this level of investment, you're even able to forego a sustain on the team and play Run Mei to boost all 3 DPSs. Gwynethyn is an okay alternative to Pela being just slightly worse. This is because when Gwynethyn triggers Fire Kiss, Acheron doesn't gain an energy point. so Gwyneth also needs the assistance of Resolution Lightcone. Unfortunately, Sampo is bottom tier for Nihility. He doesn't provide much outside of debuffing. So if we look at sustains, Preservation units has a huge advantage over Abundance. Their ability to wield Trend of the Universal Market Lightcone is huge for Acheron. Their ability to dish out debuffs can even surpass Nihility characters. Also, their ability to mitigate damage and have high taunt values makes sustaining Acheron more consistent because she has one of the lowest base defensive stats in the game. Not all preservations are made equal. Gepard and Fushuan will be the meta choices, having the highest sustainability while improving Acheron's output by a significant amount. Gepard have high taunt value with Trend Lightcone, and Fushuan buffs crit rate and better sustain. Fire main character and March 7 works pretty well with Trend Lightcone, but when it comes to sustaining, they have a little more trouble. Aventurine is really stable sustainer while doing decent damage himself, and he is okay at applying debuffs, either with his signature or Trend of the Universal Market. Gallagher is the only Abundance character to make the list, able to provide debuff, and is surprisingly good at sustain as a 4-star character. Now, let's actually formulate a team for Acheron. There's 3 meta ways to go about it. You have a traditional Hypercarry team consisting of 2 Nihility damage boosters and a Preservation sustain with Trend of the Universal Market. Gwyneth and Black Swan can be used as substitute for Nihility slot, and if you have Acheron at high investment, it's viable to forego the sustain slot and opt for a Hypercarry Harmony support. Then you have a dotcheron team that increases the frequency of Acheron ults with more debuffs, but at the same time, the damage output is spread out between 3 DPSs. You won't see the biggest Acheron numbers unless you start introducing more investment like Black Swan E1 and replacing the sustain with Run-Mei. Run-Mei was already insane at supporting dual DPS comps. Having 3 DPS makes her that much desirable. Run-Mei is also a pseudo-defensive unit as well with break efficiency and pushbacks. And finally, you have Welt being utilized at his best. A hybrid of offense and defense utilities really pushes Acheron teams even further by opening up a team slot for Harmony character. And briefly speaking on Acheron's E2, you're able to replace a Nihility support for a Harmony character in a Hypercarry setup. This brings Acheron's DPS potential to its absolute limit. But for a dotcheron team, especially at high investment, you're not gaining much or at all by removing anyone. So her E2 is not significant here for dotcheron. Alright, cool. My name is Gladius. Thank you for watching. Until next time.